Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Just to give you a quick bit of background, I have got a vast amount of material to get through tonight because the planning process really is it covers so many different. It has to apply to so many different people. So it will be a bit of a bit of a fast journey. So yeah, the slides are going to be available online. I have all my talks are online. I don't know if people can see this on the link underneath. The slideshows, or Paul can distribute the URL for it, but you'll always be able to access this information. And if you do go to the web page with the slides on, if you press P, this is the note. The notes are in the side, so you can always click on links if there's additional information. Okay, and I've been forest gardening in earnest for about 5 years. We've got 3 acres of forest garden up in West Wales near Cardigan. So, without any further ado, I'm going to get cracking with it and just give you a kind of overview of what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to get rid of all your faces because I'm a bit scared, to be honest. So that's better. I can't see anybody, but I know that you're there. So today's seminar, what I want to do is to look at a forest garden definition, and I think this is so important because it's what defines a forest garden. Really helps you understand the design process for a forest garden. We'll look at what design is in a very quick way, and what the kind of design principles you can use, and then look at how design is related to planning and why you would want to make a plan. For me, the most important thing about this really is to get started and to write everything down. So it's super low tech. It's a list. If you write everything down, and I have actually prepared for you a PDF of a checklist of the different things to write down. So it's kind of I'll go through that in detail. There is a link to that which I can get shared as well on the chat. It comes up in the slideshow. So time right then, and then finally I'll look at some design tools and guidelines for you as well. There isn't really going to be enough time to look at any detail about how to create the plan itself. I can just kind of give you some pointers and show you a couple of tricks and give you a couple of links to go off and do it. But I'll highlight the most important things to capture and the most important things to put in your plan and on your actual map of it as well. So when I'm talking about a plan, the plan is everything, including the actual the drawn plan, but also all the lists as well. Forest garden definition. As everybody, I am sure, has a copy of this book, which I kind of keep returning to and have it by my bedside and read it every day. The subtitle is Working with Nature to Grow Edible Crops. And for me, this is Martin Crawford's book, Creating a Forest Garden. And for me, this book is like the one. If you're going to get one book, this is the book you should get. And that also sums it up as well about forest garden. It's working with nature. What you're actually doing is creating an ecosystem to be able to support the growing, to be able to support the growing of productive crops. And it's you're letting nature do the work. Nature's doing the heavy lifting behind it. So, 4-year-old just coming in. Excuse me a second. Okay. Yeah, you go ahead. Okay. 1 second. I couldn't have time. You go to the toilet. Tell Archie. There we go. Okay. I didn't plan that. So we're working with nature to grow edible crops. And what underpins it for me is it's about creating an ecosystem. So it is working with nature, and you are growing native plants where possible within a forest garden, because you want to create that ecosystem. And the other kind of characteristics is it's emulating the woodland edge, and you're using perennials like trees and permanent ground cover. And this is like one particular take on the definition for a forest garden. And this is a photograph from Martin Crawford's forest garden down in Devon. And I think that's really, really important thing to do, is to keep returning to that as a design principle, is that you're creating an ecosystem. It's not just a garden. It's not just a vegetable garden. It's an ecosystem. So what is design? I'm going to move on here. Crudely put, design is purposefully putting things in the right place. And design is a tool. There is, you could talk about it for years, make a whole career out of it, but it's a tool, and people can use design for good or for evil. I just found out the other day that that IBM built the punch cards for the Nazis in the 1930s. So they designed a whole system. It's amoral. What you actually need to have is a wider context. It requires a wider context to put design into, to be able to use it. And I think this is what forest gardening does so successfully. The wider context is nature, is supporting ecosystems. So it fits in really well. And the other thing, on a kind of individual level, every one of you will have a garden that is so different in so many different ways from everybody else's garden. And there are so many variables. What it comes down to is arranging the elements within a garden, but there are just so many different variables that it's just seeing what you have and then arranging them the best that you can. So the kind of forest garden design then is about working with nature. It means that you're designing for nature, that you are bearing this in mind at every kind of step along the way. I have become increasingly interested in the wildlife aspect of forest gardening as well, because they are so closely intertwined. And as part of that is growing native plants. And I can highly recommend, this is a book I always recommend. There's a book called A New Garden Ethic by a chap called Benjamin Vogt. North American, he's a prairie gardener, and he's more of an ornamental gardener, but some of the issues he talks about are absolutely essential across the board. And first and foremost, really, it's about human supremacy and not treating plants as objects, and actually treating plants as living things, as part of a wider ecosystem. So for your forest garden plan, really, you've got to ask yourself, what's the point of making a plan? I do know people who have started forest gardens by just planting stuff and say, oh, we'll have a tree here and a tree there, and they chuck everything together, and it's a bit of a mess, and the trees grow and they're too close together, and then more work needs to be done to thin them out. So the whole reason for having a plan is so that you're making you make big mistakes earlier on, but not out in the garden. Yep. So you sort your ideas about what you want and where you want it, and you play around with ideas, and then you put the ideas into action. So a really, really useful way of doing this is to write a list. I'm an inveterate list writer, and I write lists about everything. But it's actually really, really useful. I have found this for forest gardening is to write down lists of everything that you can think of. And in some ways, the planning stage, there's a real beauty to it. There's a real sense of excitement, because it can be anything. You can think of anything, and it's all in your imagination. I mean, each of the other stages when you come to creating a forest garden also have their own magic as well. But there's something about looking at a list of plants and saying, wow, we could plant any of these. So what I would say then is the other reason for writing this stuff down is that you will forget it. Like how you think you will remember a plant that you put into a pot without writing a label. You go, yeah, I'll remember that's such and such a plant, and invariably you will forget. A plan, in the same way, will communicate these ideas to others if you're working with other people and living with other people, but also it will communicate these ideas to your future self. So in a year's time, you go, why on earth did I do such and such? Why did I want to have a tree there? You go, oh yes, that's why. So kind of really useful thing to have. There's a couple of different tools. I mean, you can use pen and paper. There's I think I got it written down later on. Yeah, there's a really handy tool for the computer for note taking. There's one called Simple Note. It's in the note. It's at the end of the seminar, but that's worth having a look at, just to write a simple list of stuff, and you can create notes easily as well. And as a special extra bonus for attendees of this seminar, I've made a planning checklist, because it's a checklist to beat all checklists, and you can download it as a PDF. And here I have, I know I can't see myself, it's a list of stuff, but it's got a checklist, and you can see the different sections. So all the stuff that I'm talking about today is all in this PDF. It's 4 sides of A4, with big gaps in it for you to write things down on as well, and then a couple of references at the bottom too. So all the things I'm going to talk about for the planning checklist, they're all on this PDF. Okay. Okay, so the thing to bear in mind as well is that there is a lot of stuff. There is an awful lot of things to kind of consider, and in some respects, it's a lot to get your head around about all the things that you should survey, and the features that you should think about, and the plants that you want, and how to organise your pictures, and how to start the plan. But just go work through them bit by bit, and the survey is so important. One thing I would say is, whatever garden you're planning, is to give it a bit of time. Don't jump in straight away. There's no need to do everything up front. Give it a bit of time and have a think about where you want the main elements in the garden. Yep. So don't just jump in, buy a load of plants, plant them out. Do have a think about them first of all. I mean, you give yourself a few months to settle in, to see where things are, to see how the weather is, to see the garden as it is throughout the seasons. So there's no rush. There's no kind of rush to jump in. And actually, doing a survey, having a checklist does slow you down, because you need to spend that time making observations of things. So first of all, survey. Survey. Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. So the survey, there are 5 different elements to it. There's the position of your the land, the elements on the land, on the plot, the features that exist already, and the situation of the land, how the land sits in the landscape, and then as you yourself, and how you sit within the land, and what your setup is. So I'll just quickly go through these. I'm not going to have time to talk about them in any kind of great detail, but I'll just give a quick list through. So number 1, surveying the position. So you need to know what orientation your land is, and that simply means, where does the land point in terms of the compass. So most people will have a compass on their phone. Use that, and it will tell you which direction the land is facing, and that really has a big determination upon the type of plants that you're growing, but also where you're getting the weather from, and where the sun is as well. The other thing to look at is the elevation, how high up you are, and that will determine the weather and the climate. And finally, the slope. If there's a slope on the land, that has a big bearing as well. If you're north facing and you're on a slope, you're going to get significantly less sunshine, whereas if you're south facing, you get more sunshine. If you're south facing on a slope, you're going to get even more sunshine, to put it crudely. So you need to work out your orientation, your elevation, and the slope. The elements, These are the elements of the water, earth, wind, water, and fire, the sun. So you need to make a note of where the water flows on your land, and how much rainfall you have, and if there is any kind of permanent running water in the winter, if there are any damp patches in the summer, if there's any damp patches, if you have a what do they call it? There's the river that comes up. Oh, I can't remember the name. Oh, what was that? No. It's an English word, and it's for winterborn. So in the winter, yeah, you have it's a stream which comes up it's a stream that comes up in the winter time. So that kind of stuff, need to kind of know where the water is, so you don't plant you're putting plants in the right place, and how much how much water's in the soil as well. And related to that is the earth. This is a photograph from the forest garden last summer, and it was really, really dry, as you can see from the photograph. But the earth is a major contributing factor. The geology of it, but also the acidity of it, how dry it gets, and what type of soil it is. It's like doing soil tests for it to see what type of soil you have, because obviously plants grow in soil, so it's a major factor in it. Next one is wind. Where's the prevailing wind? You can find this out you can ask around, or you can just experience it yourself. We have southwesterlies where we are, and you kind of need to grow windbreaks to break. You need to have windbreaks to soften the effect of the wind. And then sun is working out the position of the sun in the sky. Oh dear, yeah. Okay. So, and then finally climate, which is like overall over the whole year. So we're looking at features now. Very quickly, features are existing plants, existing utilities. Really, really important. Existing plants will actually tell you what kind of plants will grow there, and will give you an indication of what the soil is like, and what you can grow. Utilities are really, really important. This is a photograph of some swallows on a telephone line. Utilities are really important because you want to make sure you're not planting trees underneath a power line or a telephone line, and you're not planting trees on top of a sewage pipe, for example. So you need to know where your utilities are, and map them out, and make sure you're not planting anything that's going to get in the way. And finally, structures, existing structures. A favourite is finding a concrete, the concrete foundations of an old greenhouse or something. You're not even aware that it's there, but this is the kind of stuff you need to find out. And finally, access, public footpaths, and where the existing gates are. If you need to consider putting in another gate, that's kind of critical as well. And finally, the situation. Whereabouts you are. We're out in West Wales, we're out in West Wales, and we get a lot of what's stuff called slurry, cow poo and water sprayed on the fields. We've got some going on next door as we speak. Actually, it's delightful. So you need to think about where you are, where your neighbours are, how close they are. If there's a problem with noise, a problem with privacy, any kind of issues around slurry. So your place in the landscape, and how you fit in, and this can alter your plans as well. And finally, I envisage you as a medlar flower blossom, and this is the household setup. And it really is important to think. I know we're talking about forest gardening as an ecosystem, but people need to be able to fit into that ecosystem as well. So it's who's in the household, and what do different people want in the household, and what's the setup, and have you got toddlers, have you got teenagers, has everyone left home, what's the kind of situation. And this will kind of determine how you design things, how much energy you've got, how much how much knowledge you have, how much time you've got, and your other kind of resources like money and other things like that. So All these you need to be aware of before starting a forest garden, because a forest garden is low maintenance, but only when it's established. It's quite a lot of work to set up and does take up quite a lot of time and resources. So secondly, features, and this bit, there's a big blank page in your checklist, and you write a list of everything that you want. I've got a friend of mine who was doing some work for a next door neighbour, and he said, I've put all this stuff down that I want. I went, no, that's brilliant. That's a really, really good thing to do. Write down everything you think you could want. Yeah, and it's much, much easier. It's better to cross it off the list later than it is to think, if only I had thought of. Yep. So, however bizarre or outlandish it might seem, write everything down on a list. So I've just got a couple of examples: polytunnel, greenhouse, raised beds, wildlife pond, wildflower meadow, that kind of thing. Just think about all the things that you could like: football pitches, basketball hoop. Yep, it's everything that's in the garden and how it can fit together. Because it is worth bearing in mind as well that a forest garden doesn't have to be exclusively a forest garden. It can integrate. That's the beauty of it, is that it can integrate into other gardens as well, into an existing garden or into existing uses. Yeah. So forest gardening is much more about the idea of growing an ecosystem and of growing it in layers than it is about it has to be a set space or it has to be a set size. Next up is plants. Make a list of plants. I mean, I've got a list of the plants that I started out with, and it's great. I've still got it, and it's quite funny. There's hundreds of plants. I write them all down and say, I want one of these and one of those. Fantastic resource for this, which I'm sure a lot of people will be aware of, is the Plants for a Future website, and it's great. Lists loads and loads of information. Fantastic, brilliant resource. Number one go-to website for plants relating to forest garden. And secondly, RHS Plant Finder. They do have a lot of there's a lot of additional information, and the really nice thing is there's a native filter, which means you can filter out all the native plants on their database, which is super handy. It's really good to be able to find out native plants. And then think about when you're designing. The beauty of designing with nature in mind is that wildflowers fit perfectly into a forest garden, and then the whole kind of ornamental aspect as well as the edible aspect and the useful aspect is it's all got a function. Think about native wildflowers as well, and you can use them ornamentally. We have some Aquilegia columbine, the purple flower, it's out in flower at the moment, and some red campion. Growing together kind of by accident, but they look fantastic, kind of pink and purple. So think about native wildflowers. Next up is pictures, and I just say I think it's a really good idea, particularly when you're starting out planning your garden, is to think about what you want, and it really helps to visualize it, to say this is the kind of thing, this is the tree or the pond and actually if you have a picture, it helps to focus the mind. It really does, and it helps to go, yep, that's kind of what we're going with, and that makes a lot of sense. I've got a bit of an 80s slogan going on there: inspiration, motivation, aspiration. There's not a sarcastic emoji. But it does actually make a big difference to be able to get all your pictures, print them out, put them on your walls. I've got photographs on my walls of different plants and sketches and things. And there's Pinterest as well, website which I'm sure you're aware of, which is really good for collecting images together and sharing them with other people. And finally is the map. The map is not the territory. The map is a tool like the plan. The map. The kind of key things for the map is to mark important features. So your utilities and your footpaths and your tree, your kind of major structural stuff, the trees, and where everything is going and how it fits together. And it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be. I'm going to go off piste a second. Hold on a second. Oh, I've got my just a sketch. I don't know if you probably can't see that. It's just like 5 mil squared graph paper with a sketch on, and a measurement for the outline of a garden, and it can be really, really simple. And it kind of, so long as it's approximate, it doesn't have to be spot on. The most important thing is to, once you've measured a map, is to go and then measure again later on out on the ground. Every single map that I've made, every single kind of visual plan, has always been a few meters out. It's never spot on. It's always, you've got to do a bit of thinking on the ground. So always, always, always measure outside first of all before putting stuff in, see if they fit. Yeah, so I hope that makes sense. 5-minute warning. Okay. Design guide. Just going to go on to, this is the final part then. So you have your checklist, and you've got lots of lists of all the plants and the features and your situation and the survey all done. And now I just want to talk about kind of 4 key kind of design principles, design guides. So first off is zoning. Thinking about the house, where you work out from the house, and then you keep the highest maintenance, most used kind of plants. So for example, herbs or leafy vegetables like spinach type plants, you keep them nearest the house, or the kind of valuable stuff like cherries that you want to be able to run out and scare the birds away from your cherry crop. But keep the most used nearest and the highest maintenance nearest, and then do a bit by work out and work your way out. What I would suggest doing is this going to work? Yeah, is to divide the land up, divide the garden up into different areas, and it helps to kind of simplify the process, and then concentrate on one area and then move on to the next area when you're kind of planning it, and when you're creating the forest garden as well. And think of paths and functions, and think about again how the space is going to be used and how the bits fit together. Yep, and this goes for every single garden, no matter how small, no matter how apparently simple. You know, where you're hanging up the washing, where the kid's going to play football, where you're going to put the nut tree. So yeah, think about zoning. And secondly is putting the right plant in the right place. You really, you need to think about. Oh, final. That's the final size. You need to think about the plant size. This is a great Solomon seal, by the way, which I've got in the garden in a part shade bit of the forest garden. You need to think about the final size of the plant, how big it will grow to eventually, with the diameter and the height, how much sun it requires, whether it's full sun, part sun, the type of soil it needs. And think about whether it's a native plant as well. But get the right plant in the right place, and if it's happy, it will grow really, really well. Most plants, plants want to live. Is the bottom line. Tree spacing is the other kind of key design thing. Make sure that you have enough space between trees. This is 1/4 to 1/2 of the average diameter. So when you're putting out the plan, make sure you've got enough space between the trees. And protection is the last one. You need to protect the garden with windbreaks, ultimately windbreaks. In the meantime, you can use nurse trees, which are like small shelters for tender plants, and dead hedges, which is what you can see in the image. It's just like a load of branches put between bigger branches. And then finally, my favourite tools is 2-3 metre bit of bamboo, and this is for quickly measuring out in the garden. Secondly is string and bamboo. I've got one here I made earlier. This isn't the actual real one, and use that to draw the circles around that I showed you earlier on when you're measuring out the garden. And then a measuring tape, which is a surveyor's measuring tape, which costs about £10, which is invaluable as well for measuring up the garden. Okay, and remember, measure twice, plant once. So at the end of that, just want to say, write it all down, get it all down on paper, or however your list takes shape, and make the big mistakes early on. Make the big mistakes early on paper. Don't make them out in the garden and then kick yourself 5 years later. And finally, unlike what I'm doing now, take your time. Okay, that is it. So there we go, the end. That's my email, and that's my newsletter sign up. Thank you very much.